A pandemic of violence floods the streets of major cities as cases of the media-dubbed murder virus, MV20, soar, causing those infected to go on killing sprees. Caught in the middle, police detective Angela Miller finds her only trustworthy ally in the self-proclaimed psychic PI, Gerald Henry. As the two try to navigate the violence, they are drawn into New Age guru Abramelin Harvest's plot to heal the planet. Harvest's missive?
The world is sick, and humanity is the infection.
The cure? Murder. From the twisted mind of Shawn C. Baker, author of A Collection of Desires and Shadow Play in Book 1, Kim and Jesse, comes his most vicious novel yet, Murder Virus. Available where books are sold.
Hello, welcome to another episode of A Most Horrible Library. This is the podcast where we like to talk about all of those little spooky things that are printed on paper. Everything from graphic novels to comic books to novellas to actual hardbound novels and everything in between. I am your host, Chris Saunders.
And I am your other host, Shawn Charles Baker.
And today we have a good smattering of things that we're going to talk about. Did I use that word right? Smattering? That sounds.
You did.
It feels.
I like it.
It feels weird in my mouth, but at the same time, it feels kind of right. So first up, we are going to talk about a new series that has come out from Image Comics that is called Vinyl. It is written by Doug Wagner with art by Daniel Hillard, who some of you might be familiar with as the creators of the comic Plastic.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what it is, it's an unsettling tale of psychopaths, sweet love, and a serial killer named Walter. When Walter's best friend, the FBI agent charged with his capture, is kidnapped by a death cult of all-female sunflower farmers, Walter finds himself deep within an underground labyrinth filled with secrets and monsters. But are their monsters more horrific than his? So I really enjoyed this one. I've read the first 2 issues. There's only 2 issues that are currently out. This just launched, I think, in June of 2021 here. And to me, I think it's a lot of fun. It really has a fun premise to it. Essentially, it starts off with a series of time jumps. It literally first page starts off 2 days from now and gets into some really rather gruesome stuff, which then it immediately jumps to today, and we get to see some fun interactions between Walter, the serial killer, and his the FBI agent Dennis, who is tasked with taking him in. And it kind of centers around the odd relationship that these two have before it jumps back in time to 2 weeks ago. And then jumps right back into. So, I mean, it bounces around a bit. But you've read this one as well, Shawn, right?
I did. And I don't know. It looks really good. Now, I'm unfamiliar with Plastic, so I'm unfamiliar with the creator's other work. I feel like the time jumps right away set the wrong tone for me, because I kind of had this, I'm like, what's going on? And not that I need a story to be linear, far from it, but it just didn't quite work with me. Now, maybe a second reading would smooth that out, but I found by midway through the issue, I'm like, I don't know who is who or what is going on, or why this serial killer is meeting with the FBI agent at a cafe, and what their relationship around this song is, and how this ties into everything else going on. Now, I'm sure that's being set up as the gotta see for the series that's supposed to draw you in. Like, I need to see how this all eventually fits together, but it did the exact opposite to me, where I was like, pass. So I only read the first issue.
Yeah, it did feel a little disjointed. Just, essentially the very first couple of pages, it takes you right in, mid plot to the action, which visually,
Is great.
yeah, it's great. I really like the art style of Daniel Hillard.
Yes.
The coloring as well too. It's just, it's a very fun and interesting looking book. I'm good with the flashback to to present day today, because you do kind of get a little bit of that relationship between the FBI agent Dennis and Walter. So essentially, once the story actually opens up, it starts off today. It's in Kansas City, Missouri. And Dennis is sitting at a outdoor coffee, little cafe thing. And he's having a conversation with Val, maybe, who is essentially in his ear, basically being his backup, who is recording everything that is being said. Essentially, it seems like Walter is a serial killer who they've been trying to nail for a very long time, and they just can't. They can't. The FBI, they know it's this guy, but they don't have the evidence to successfully get him. So I don't know how this relationship started between Dennis and Walter. Walter considers Dennis to be his best friend. There's a scene in here where Walter first comes and he sits down and he says, to Dennis, "Hey, can you believe that we've been meeting here for almost a year now? That's like an anniversary or something." He's very excited to see him. He does legitimately consider him to be his best friend. And Walter is who appears to be this kind of kindly older guy, anyway, gray hair. I wouldn't call him elderly by any means, and he seems very, very happy. He seems very just like a normal, happy, old man. And in the middle of this meeting, this woman walks up, wearing this long, kind of silky white, revealing dress, robe kind of thing. Looks very kind of ceremonial. Shows up. She's talking to Dennis, the FBI agent. She's saying like, "Hey, you are responsible for imprisoning my son. We're going to get our revenge. He's desperate to start a new family. If you look over there, there's your daughter. She's one of us now, and she's going to be his new bride." Dennis willingly goes along with this cult leader in exchange for the release of his daughter. And now Walter has taken it upon himself to rescue his best friend, the FBI agent who's trying to take him down, away from this weird, serial cult. Touching into the second issue a little bit here, he goes through and he starts to recruit these other serial killers to help him descend upon the cult's stronghold. And you see that there is some interesting kind of paranormal stuff going on as well. There's what they refer to as husks, who are essentially soulless bodies that have been taken over by these different spirits who are basically, like kind of like voodoo zombies
Yeah.
to an extent.
Which really doesn't necessarily mean that it's supernatural. It could also be pharmaceutical, and they're just couching it in the terms of their cult to impress people.
Very true. Very, very true. I found it a very intriguing premise, because they do cut to a lot of these horrific things that Walter has done in the past, and you think, God, this guy's a monster. But then you cut to him when he's not in the serial killer mode, and he's a very nice, pleasant man who's willing to do whatever it takes to rescue his, air quote, best friend.
Right.
Which is, it's very oh, that's very endearing.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, and it should be noted too that he puts on a mask when he is in serial killer mode. And it seems to me like in his mind, the masked version of him and the unmasked version of him are almost like two separate entities. And it's weird because he wears like this giant like teddy bear with button eye mask when he is in serial killer mode. So that's a bit creepy.
It's really creepy.
And there's this whole kind of angle with it too, with music and songs. And the reason it's called vinyl, I believe he says in the first, couple pages of the first issue, is that, everything sounds better on vinyl.
Well, and they kind of, in that first issue, they kind of show like they fetishize the actual record. And he even kind of, the way he talks about it, like what you said, analog and vinyl, there's definitely, that's like a big element of his character. I don't know how that ties in or if it does. I mean, it's cool. Everything about this series I like, in like visually or in like theory, but I feel like that, and maybe I should give it a second issue, but it feels like there's maybe too much going on, and then also B, like I just felt like some of the stuff was played a little bit like over the top for the sake of being over the top, and that it didn't, how did you say it, like it disjointed a little bit. No, I mean, it could end up being charming in the end, so maybe I will try again. It's definitely like, I think it's worth people reading. I mean, just grab the first issue and I feel like you'll be like, I think Chris, we're the perfect example, like where it's down the middle, like it grabbed you and you went to issue 2 and it put me off and I didn't go to issue 2. So what's the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get a number 1, read it and be like, I love it, I'll read more. You know what, I'll file up my box and I'll have the number 1.
True. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would highly recommend at least picking up the first issue. And if you do enjoy it, then absolutely pick up the second issue. For me, I'm after the second issue, especially, I'm pretty hooked. This is going to be one that I am going to see through to the end. It looks like this is actually going to be a 6-issue miniseries here. What have you been kicking around lately, Shawn?
The book that I was on the fence with, Nocterra. So this is through Image. It's Scott Snyder, who we've been talking about a lot on both podcasts, both this and the Horror Vision. Tony Daniel, Temu Moray. The first issue I bought, and I think the reason I bought is Snyder, but also Tony Daniel back in the day, way back in the day. So, I was one of those people, I started reading Spawn as a whatever, I was in freshman in high school or whatever, when, the big Image comic split happened. And I stuck with it for, let's say 30 issues before I realized like, oh, this is shite. Like, and I still have the first 4 issues, but everything else, when I moved to LA, I sold all of that shit back so I could get trade paperbacks. It was where I got a lot of my Hellblazer trade paperbacks, just to get them out, but anyway, Tony Daniel had taken over the artistic duties on Spawn at some point, and I would be lying if I did not say that in the intervening years, I don't look back on any of the storytelling in Spawn favorably, but there was issues that Tony Daniel drew that I thought were amazing, and I've never been super art focused, the way I read comics is more, it's like a very synergized experience. So it's very rare that like art drives me away or art draws me in. It's changed a little bit over the last like 6 months to a year. But seeing that Tony Daniel was drawing this definitely played into why I gave it a chance. And I read the first issue. So basically, Nocterra, it's 10 years after the world, it just becomes everlasting night. And when this happens, people change into these like living monstrosities that they refer to as shades. And it's like, you'll see their gums darken, and then they slowly become more monstrous, and then they no longer look like humans at all, and they just kill every human being. So you're left with this very apocalyptic scenario, and you have these semblances of society set up. And the main character, Val, she's like a ferryman, which is she drives a big rig to get supplies. And so because she does this and she goes between these outposts of humanity that are fortified in a way where the shades can't get in because they use light. So the light kills these things, but the sun is gone, right? So you have to have man-made light, which is fallible, because now you've got, in apocalyptic scenario, energy, energy resources are limited, yada, yada, yada. So she has built up a life of doing these, long haul supply runs or whatever. And it affords her a certain prestige in the community. And she kind of gets drawn into this thing where somebody shows up and says, like, I know where we can go to the sun if you can just transport. It's an older guy. He's like, if you can transport me and my granddaughter. And so she very begrudgingly takes on this task. And the thing about Val, before the event, she was blind. So the book always has this recurring thing. Where were you that morning? The morning the big PM hit. And that's what they call it, the big PM. That's where like the sun disappeared. Yeah, it's cool. And so that it's always this idea where this was the landmark event of society. Now, like, everybody knows, if you're alive, you know exactly where you were. And she was blind, and she had literally just been able to see. She opened her eyes, is able to see just as all the lights go out. So she doesn't it's a weird, she has this brother, M, and he was kind of her eyes for her life, and he's like, dear to her or whatever. And their parents changed.
Oh shit.
Like they literally had to survive. Their parents, like, it's going to be okay, and then their parents change and attack them. And so they have all this glue that sticks them together as siblings, and they've come this far. And then, not really a big spoiler, but like, you learn early on, like, so she's going to drive this older guy who says that he knows how to save everybody, and he knows where the sun is, and blah blah blah, if she can just transport him and his granddaughter. And she's like, I've heard all this bullshit before, but she ends up doing it. And M goes with her, but M is infected, so they don't know, like, the timetable seems to be different for different people, so it's a race against time. And so issue 6 just came out. I just read issue 6 earlier today. And like I said, I was kind of on the fence with this book, and issue 5 really sold me. And I don't know if it's just kind of like the gathering force behind the events or whatever, but they had gotten to this outpost, and then it seems like there's, as always, anybody who has any leverage over anybody else uses it, often not for the best reasons. And so you start to see this bigger conspiracy, and basically the first 6 issues opens the door to a much bigger story, which I thought was really cool. I would recommend it. And it's a cool hybrid. It's definitely, there's horrific elements for sure, but it kind of has it's weird, it kind of has an old school Image Comics flavor without not being good. And what I mean by that is basically, well, let's be frank, right? So with Spawn and a lot of those titles, they were all flash up front and then no substance behind them. And we didn't know it. Comics has kind of aged with us. We've talked about this, Chris, like, I've been back on Drink with Comics, we talked about this. And really, like, I think Image is, what's so great about the Image story is they learned, like, fairly quickly enough to save themselves. Like, oh, we're going to have to rely more on just, we can't just be like the artists and these titles that are basically like, let's face it, right? What was McFarlane known for drawing? Spider-Man.
Yeah.
What's Spawn? It's Spider-Man with Batman's cape, essentially.
Yeah, with a splash of venom.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What's
Mhm.
Jim Lee is X-Men, right?
Yeah.
Wildcats.
Yeah.
There's, I mean,
Mhm.
and through and through. And so other than the Max, there was nothing out of those first couple waves of Image that to me is worth going back to. Again, there's probably some moments in Spawn. I know Neil Gaiman wrote it for a while. I know Alan
Mhm.
Moore wrote it for a while. I know Grant Morrison wrote it for a while, which is why I was able to trade all those comics in when I moved, because they couldn't be collected forever.
Yeah.
So they were
Yeah.
never in trade paperback. So there was a healthy market for them. But this has, I don't know, there's something about it that feels like that. Maybe it's just because it's Tony Daniels art, but I don't feel like that. I feel like this is Snyder kind of looking back on Image. I don't think he's maybe doing this. I don't know that this is his impetus with Nocterra,
Mhm.
but he's looking back on the things about that made people like it initially, and saying like, let's do this, but like, let's do it in a way that like is sustainable and good. And so the writing's solid. It's got a cool world, and it seems like it's building to a good story. So I'm in.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I know I picked up the first issue of this, and I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I kind of forgot all about it. I think I purchased a good sum of books, and I think this one kind of ended up right there at the bottom of the pile, and then I ended up getting more books, and it just kind of stayed there at the bottom. But yeah, after hearing you talk about it, and after kind of perusing some of the current issues here online, it's definitely one that you've rekindled my interest in it. So I'm going to binge these first 6 issues and follow it on from there. So is this? Do you know? Is this an ongoing story, or is this just set to be a mini series?
I think it's going to go. I feel like he said at some point it's how far it's going to go, like 30 issues or something. I could be wrong, because I've read so much Snyder recently that I might be confusing it. He always has like, kind of voluminous like back matter where he talks about the comic. Um, I don't think it's going to be ongoing indefinitely. I feel like it is definitely something that is going to have a couple different arcs that will then make a whole. I know issue 6 just came out this week. October is volume 1. So October the
Gotcha.
trade
Gotcha.
comes out. So that means they're going to do the seasons thing where I'm going to guess maybe November, December it'll come back.
And that's and for me that's smart. You
I
you
agree.
you have to sit back and let the arc breathe a little bit.
Yep, I
you
totally
know
agree.
just and from just a creator kind of standpoint, you wrap up your first arc, and then you sit back, you kind of digest what you've just done, and it really helps to make a stronger second arc, I think, as opposed to a lot of these books where it's like we just got to pump them out and pump them
Right,
out,
right.
which is I think why I prefer the independent creator owned comics
Yeah.
versus anything coming out of the big two. The
Mm-hmm.
big two, they have their deadlines, they are more of a business, as opposed to whereas Image and Aftershock and all those kind of imprints, whereas they are obviously a business as well, but I tend to see a lot more of their books as a labor of love versus just a crank this out to make a paycheck to pay the bills.
Oh, absolutely. And dude, like honestly, you know, as an aside that just goes along with what you just said about the big two, I've been reading more Marvel now than I have in years. I don't know what sparked that. I have a feeling that with the pandemic, I needed psychologically, I needed something familiar that was regular. And I went back to Spider-Man, and I was never a regular Spider-Man reader, but I read it off and on in the 80s, and some of it those issues I really love and I stand by. So, but I never read it regularly. And I started reading Nick Spencer's around issue 40, and it's every it's twice a month. That's just a regular schedule, right? But then also they always have these other series. Like right now it's Sinister War. So it's really 3 times a month. And then now when they relaunch it, when he leaves, it's going to be 3 times a month. And they have multiple writers because no writer can, like how Nick Spencer did what he did. And there are other writers that come in that have helped him, Ed Brashan, and I feel like somebody else. But no, going forward, when they relaunch, it's just straight out, it's 3 times a month. And when you look at Marvel solicitations, it's like every week there's a Amazing Spider-Man issue. And that is like what I said off camera earlier about a different creator. Like when there's that much content, you have to question how good it can be, you know. And like I've liked Spencer's run, but there's some points where I'm like, I don't think that we needed this much. Anyway, that's an aside. But yeah, so basically just to say, you're absolutely right. The best stories, the most cohesive and consistently fantastic, are always going to be the stuff that is independently owned. Not to say that you can't have a great Batman story or a great Frank Castle story or a great Spider-Man story. You definitely can. But you're not going to, on a regular basis. No way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that.
So what about you, man? What do you got?
Well, there's another one that I know that we have both read. This is another new book from Image Comics. I think there's just the one issue out so far.
Yeah.
And that is The Me You Love in the Dark. So now this one was written by Scotty Young with art by Jorge Corona. No relation to the virus. Essentially what this is, it's a haunted house story. It's about an artist named Ro who retreats from the grind of the city to an old house in a small town to find solace and inspiration without realizing the muse within is not what she expected. You know, and it does have some high praise. There's, you know, they do say that it is definitely for fans of Stephen King and Neil Gaiman. They describe it as being a beautifully dark and disturbing story of discovery, love, and terror. And, you know, just from that elevator pitch alone, I was sold on it. So I picked up this first issue, and I really do enjoy the artistic styling that Jorge Corona did with this. I feel like it fits the narrative of what we're being presented very well. You know, and there's not much of plot development in the first issue. You know, I would almost kind of look at this first issue as, you know, as an issue 0, just to kind of give you a little bit of background about it. It primarily is this artist, this girl who she's recently made a big splash in the art world. She's kind of the next big thing, but she's having you know, whatever the artist's version of writer's block is, where she can't find the inspiration. You know, so we see her you know, sitting there, you know, almost about to put the brush to the canvas, and then stops and then starts to do it again, and then gets frustrated, throws a bit of a tantrum. You know, she's drinking a lot of wine, and this whole time she's very aware that this house is supposedly haunted, and she doesn't really seem to care. You know, she kind of meanders around through the house, talking to this ghost, you know, literally saying, you know, hey, ghost, if you're real, then I would appreciate it if you'd help me with some unpacking.
Yeah.
You know, maybe just hang up a picture or two, just make yourself useful.
Taunting it.
Yeah. I mean, but not really taunting it, you know, like those ghost adventure assholes.
No, not
know?
not like that. Not at all. No.
You know, but just, you know, she's just kind of like, you know, like, hey, if you're really there, you know, help me out a little bit here. And so the first issue is just a lot of her drinking wine, struggling with her artist's block. You know, she has a conversation with her art broker, art dealer. I don't really know what you would.
I think dealer
manager
is the right word. Yeah, manager.
Yeah, just kind of whatever that is. Who's just kind of stressing that, like, hey, you know, you need to be putting out some art so we can keep the gallery open. And you know, kind of towards the end of the first issue, you know, she gets very, very frustrated, and yeah, like I was saying, she throws a tantrum, trashes everything. Then the next day, or no, I'm sorry. Right after the her little tantrum, she kind of has this moment of self-doubt where she's just absentmindedly talking out loud to this, quote, ghost, saying like, oh, well, should I just pack it in and go back to being a barista? When she kind of hears this disembodied voice just say, no, you should not. To which she just like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, runs out of the house. Like, okay, well, when you start hearing voices, it's probably time to get out of the house for a bit and maybe cut back on the wine. So she, reluctantly goes back into the house and, like, oh, all right, nice try, ghost. Walks back into her little art studio, and she's just dumbfounded that everything is perfectly cleaned up. And there's just 2 words written on the canvas that just says, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, well, that is pretty crazy, but also it's a little sweet. So I'm losing my mind, right? Hey, ghost, if you're real, am I going mad? And to which the disembodied voice again says, I'm not sure whether or not you're going mad, but I am very real.
I'm very real.
And that's where the first issue ends. So, again, it feels very much like an issue 0, just to kind of give you a taste of the world. There's really not very much plot development in this first issue, but from what I've read, I'm definitely all in for a second issue to see where it goes. And I should point out too that periodically in the panels you do see a kind of shadowy outline of a bipedal humanoid figure that's just always kind of lurking just out of the range of her
awareness.
Exactly. So yeah, so I enjoyed this one. What are your takeaways from this, Shawn?
I really liked it, and I couldn't. Anthony and I touched very briefly on this in the last episode of the Horror Vision, and I realized one of the main things. Look at the cover art. So the character, she reminds me of somebody, and I couldn't put my finger on it. It's Thessaly from Sandman, the big round glasses. So that right away, and then really, if you look at the opening page is like her and the real estate agent. It's just 3 panels, and it's just her like getting there, and basically the real estate agent being like, oh, maybe we should skip this one. There's some weirdness about it. She's like, no, you know what? This is exactly what I'm looking for, which sets up the idea, like, is she really hell-bent on the house and doesn't believe in the ghosts, or is she looking for something that's haunted for inspiration? But then when you turn the page, you get the initial splash, and it's them in, now you're looking at the house, and the title is imposed like very large, kind of translucent over it. I feel like that right there tells me people that like the movies, James Wan's movies, like Insidious and Conjuring. I feel like this is for you. If you like The Conjuring, give this book a shot. I feel like there's a definite overlap. So it's kind of, to me, it's like Neil Gaiman writing a Conjuring story in a way.
Yeah, and it should be noted too that at least in this first issue, we'll see where it goes. But I have 0 sense of any kind of maliciousness from whatever is inside this house. It very politely apologizes to her. It gives her, good advice. It cleans up her tantrum mess after her.
Yeah.
So it seems like this thing just kind of wants a friend, and it wants someone to kind of hang out with and take care of. But as we've seen in numerous kind of supernatural stories over the years, that could very easily go in an entirely different direction.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see where it goes, because like you said, there's not a lot of plot development. It's really just setting up the characters and the setting, and I'm in. I mean, I feel like a lot of books that a number one would give you a lot more plot, and they would be less successful in catching my attention. This one, just with what I'm so in. I really like the tone. I love the art, and so far the writing, and just I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes less is more.
Yeah, definitely.
It in stark contrast to what we were just talking about with vinyl, with all of their time jumps, and they really took a lot of plot and really crammed it into that first issue that in a sense, made it feel very disconjointed, and it made it feel, a bit overwhelming.
Hmm.
Again, not to say that there's anything wrong with vinyl.
No, some stories need
I
different
enjoyed it.
mechanical approaches. I mean, that's just the
Exactly,
way that it is. If
exactly.
it's a heavily plot, especially when you're working in this medium and you might only have 6 issues to like get your ground, and
100%. That's
if it's
exactly
a
what I was
bigger
about to say.
story and there's more plot points, you have to do that, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Hmm.
And sometimes the story is a lot less involved, and it's just a character study or whatever.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with this one as well is that it is just a 5 issue series.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that's cool. That's
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, so it will be very interested to see how it's going to play out, how they're going to get a lot of development into those 5 issues
Yeah.
when 20% of the series so far has been very minimal plotting.
Yeah, I would expect it's probably going to be very character driven and not so much, the plot won't be have a bunch of, opinion points.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely fine with that. I love both apples and oranges.
Exactly. Exactly. What else you got?
So there was another one that I have read the first 2 issues for that I'm very much enjoying. It comes from Aftershock Comics, and it's called Beyond the Breach. So this one was written by Ed Bryson with art by Damian Cusero. And Aftershock, they've just been really knocking it out of the park lately with their horror
Yeah.
books. So the basic plot is that life just sucks for Vanessa. Her mother just died. Her boyfriend is cheating on her with her own sister, no less. So to clear her mind, Vanessa is taking the California road trip that she's been dreaming about for years. Her postcard perfect drive through old growth forests quickly turns when the breach hits. A bizarre anomaly in the sky plunges California into a nightmare world populated with strange extra-dimensional creatures. Now, Vanessa, along with Dougie, who's an orphaned child, and Kai, a strange fuzzball of a beast, they must fight to survive if they ever hope to make it back home, if there's even a home to return to. So with this one, yeah, it's very much like a dark fantasy with a lot of sci-fi elements to it, but with a lot of Lovecraftian horror to it as well.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it should be noted that like she's literally, driving in a car through like what looks like the redwoods, and she's kind of talking to herself. At the same time, she's talking to her phone that is going off with all these notifications from her ex-boyfriend, who's like she's, you see the text messages, hey, did you use my credit card to buy a fucking plane ticket? What the hell is going on? To which she's verbally responding, she's not replying to this guy. She's verbally responding, oh no, I did. It's true. And I also signed you up for about a dozen porn magazine subscriptions, all addressed to your work.
Nice.
So she's out in the world and she's enjoying this. And, literally page 3, you see her kind of squinting, going like, what? Everything gets all wonky. It goes to black. Her car crashes, and when she wakes up, there are these just literal, I hate to overuse this word because I know I use it a lot because it's been very hip in the modern zeitgeist, but there's these otherworldly Lovecraftian creatures that are just eating people on this road left and right. a couple panels later, she discovers, there's a kid trapped in a car. There's these weird little fuzzy kind of, they look like a cross between a fuzzy gremlin mixed with like a cat, this mixed with kind of like an Ewok kind of thing.
Wow.
That have these little like spears that are attacking these monster creatures. And she's like, what the fuck is going on? So she finds this little kid who's trapped in a car as its parents are literally being ripped out and eaten by monsters. So she, courageously picks up a stick to try to beat some of these monsters away. And picks up this kid, and okay, we're getting out of here. Car won't start, phones don't work. They jump out of the car. She grabs one of these spears from this weird fuzzy creature thing, stabs and kills one of these things, and for whatever reason grabs this little fuzzy creature thing under her arm and takes it with her, and they run off into the forest. And it turns out this little fuzzy creature cat thing can kind of talk, like it has like a language that she really can't understand. I mean, it's very creepy. They end up taking some refuge in like this road stop public bathroom kind of thing. And all of a sudden the kid starts hearing his parents calling out to him outside. And the girl, she hears her own sister calling out to her outside when she knows her sister's not in, is on the other side of the country.
Right.
What is going on? Before she can really react, Dougie, the little kid, throws open the door and goes running outside to his parents to see that it is this big eyeless, muscular monster thing with a giant veiny tongue sticking out, drooling, ready to eat this kid. That basically then grabs this kid, throws it down its gullet. She gets, and that's basically where the first issue ends. But it just gets weirder from there.
Sounds cool. Is this ongoing?
It is.
I think most of their stuff is not, right? It's like limited. Aftershock.
Possibly. There's not a whole lot of information about it on the Aftershock website, other than issue 2 out now.
Okay.
But issue 2 really just kicks it up a notch. Issue 2 sees her getting rescued by what at first looks like another monster. Then it kind of shows that this this big octopus tentacle kind of face on it just says like, oh, you're awake, hey, just relax. And he takes the what turns out to be like this mask helmet kind of thing off, and it's this kind of old man with this long white beard, and she realizes that she's now riding on the back of a giant tortoise. That this guy, he has a saddle on, and they're taking this thing down the highway, and she's like, what the fuck is going on? And turns out that this guy, he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't recognize half of these monsters that are roaming around now. So they've kind of figured out that something has happened, and at least no less than 3 different dimensions, planets, universes, whatever, have collided. Because there's elements from the human world, from our world, from this weird guy's world, from whatever the cat fuzzball creature thing, from whatever that world is. And it just kind of goes on from there and gets more and more bizarre, until ultimately they become attacked by this group of very science fiction-y looking humanoids saying that, like, hey, we have a warrant for the arrest for treason, for the long, white bearded guy. And if you don't come out, we're going to kill everyone inside. And at this point, you're just like, what the fuck is going on here?
That's pretty cool. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're gonna smash together all those different universes, I like the fact that it would be completely like, you would be like, what the fuck is going on, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool.
So it's very interesting. There's a lot of plot development that does happen within those first 2 issues. But for lack of a better word, I'm absolutely intrigued by this. Because we have kind of seen a little bit of that kind of story before.
Yeah.
Something happened, some dimensions got swapped around. Case in point, Robert Kirkman's Oblivion song, which is
that's immediately
absolutely
what I thought of.
fantastic. But it looks like it's not just contained to this one area. It looks like it's, there's a big swath, if not maybe the entire, world is now all of a sudden these at least 3 different dimensions are now all overlapped and colliding.
You might have sold me. I think I might pick this up. It sounds really good.
Yeah, it is. I'm enjoying it, immensely thus far. So I guess we shall see.
We shall see. So you want to talk about your recent reread of a certain novella?
Yeah. So on a whim, I got around to rereading the novella, the Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker, that most people will know it was the inspiration for his film Hellraiser. It's the origin of of the Cenobites, of the I always mispronounce the name of the damn box.
Lament configuration. That's
Lament
how I say it. But
there
there's another name for it too, and I can't think of what it is off the top of my head.
Yeah,
but yeah, the lament configuration.
Yeah, so
box.
Yeah, and I know you've read this one as well, Shawn. When was the last time that you've read this?
I read it last year for the first time in probably 5 years. It's great, and it's weird because Barker obviously wrote this, and then he wrote and directed the movie, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just to state it right off the bat, like, I love the first one. I love the second one, which he produced but did not direct.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I like the mythos, but whatever. But anyway, those are the 2 that are really closest to the novella. And it's interesting because the shit that changes between the novella and the movie, I actually think the movie's better.
I agree with you on that to an extent. There are some elements of the novella that I wish we would have seen in the film, but I know exactly what change you're talking about. So I'm not going to delve into the whole plot synopsis about this. The book came out 35 years ago. The movie came out 35 years ago. If you don't know anything about Hellraiser or Pinhead, then you're listening to the wrong podcast, my friend.
Yes, agreed.
So I'm just going to go into this assuming that everybody has, at the very least, seen the film.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest changes is the relationship of
Christy and
Rory.
Yeah.
In the movie, Christy is Rory's daughter, and his wife Julia is essentially the evil stepmother. Whereas in the novella, they're unrelated. Christy is just a friend of Rory's.
And it really, like, you really see the big difference between being somebody's friend and being their child, right? But also, like, what it does to the whole fabric of the story. I just feel like it's a lot less intense, and also certain things just don't make sense. Like, I understand in the movie why Christy fucking hates Julia and wants to protect her father, and in the book I don't understand it nearly as much. Like, it's there's not, maybe it worked better when you read it before the movie existed and it's just what it was and you didn't have anything to compare it to, but it just so like takes some of the urgency out of the whole situation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it really does, you know, because I mean, especially it seems like this, like the novella primarily takes place from the point of view of Julia, you know, Rory's wife, you know, who secretly had a tryst with Rory's brother Frank, which makes a lot of sense. You know, when it came time for the film, it seems like it's primarily from Christie's perspective. You know, it's a film about her. She is the main protagonist, which evidently, in doing a little bit of background research on this, Barker had originally intended Julia to be the main character for this series. That he originally had envisioned, you know, the follow-up, you know, to be all about Julia from her.
Are you talking about for the series of the like books, or for the movies?
For the movies.
Okay.
But it wasn't until the first film came out and there was so much fan fervor for the character of Pinhead that the character of Julia then ended up getting sidelined.
I would argue that she is the main. So one of the things I love about the Hellraiser movies is, and I think this is directly because of the novella, you know, okay, so when you get to Hellraiser 3, you see a lot more studio capital behind it, and it shows. There's explosions and all this ridiculousness, but also that's where they try and shift and make Pinhead a Freddy or a Jason, right? That's where he becomes like an icon of horror.
Yeah.
And in the first two, he is not. He's a small character that shows up at certain times, but Julia is really the bad guy.
I mean, especially in the first film.
Yeah. He's barely there.
Yeah. I mean, he comes in for the last 15 minutes. Of those 15 minutes, he's not even on screen that much.
Yeah. And in 2, I mean, they remove him. Dr. Chenard actually becomes, you know, like basically gets rid of Pinhead and becomes the new head of the Cenobites, or whatever, however you say that. But so that is interesting. And Julia is the mainstay. Like, he then, the same way in the first one, Julia resurrects Frank, Chenard resurrects Julia, and so she's kind of more of the Pinhead of. It's so interesting, and there's so many. It's such a complex story compared to like a Freddy, and it's just not. In my opinion, that's what ruined the series. Is they tried to shift, and he became one of the. I mean, it almost wasn't even their fault. I mean, it just happened. He's so iconic looking, right?
Yes, yeah, he absolutely is. And well, I mean, see, talking about the things that, you know, I love the movie. I do think that the movie is better in a lot of ways than the novella, but I really wish that they would have retained the intro that happens in the novella. You know, so the intro of the film, you know, you see Frank with the configuration, and he unlocks it, and then all of a sudden, you know, chains spring out from everywhere and pull him apart. You know, cut to black, rest of the movie starts. Yeah. Whereas in the novella, it actually starts off, you know, from his perspective, and you understand why he's trying to open the configuration, and why you know, it just gives a little bit of background about him. But then when he finally does open it, it's very similar to, you know, towards the kind of end of the film, where, you know, the Cenobites, they all show up in the very beginning there. They they make the offer to him, you know, they even say like, you know, is this really what you want? And he's, you know, yes, absolutely. Like he's been preparing for their arrival, but he just doesn't know what he got himself into. And it's very interesting, it's very intriguing, it really makes you want to know more about the Cenobites and their whole order of the Gash, you know, before the book really even kicks off.
Right.
So they
Yeah,
really
that's
they really
definitely
did
lost.
away with that. Yeah, and I wish that they would have retained that a bit. Primarily just because, you know, I want to know more. I want to know more about the Cenobites. You know, I mean, and in the, you know, at the end of the film, you know, there's a whole weird thing where the box, it turns into a winged skeleton and it flies away, and then the box ends up back in the at the original merchant who sold the box to Frank, you know, which we had that really kind of monkey's paw kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, definitely.
But whereas in the novella, you know, after Kirsty, what I think it's actually Kirsty.
Yeah, it's Kirsty, you're right.
After she, you know, manages to escape, there's the leader of the Cenobites, who's called the Engineer. He actually shows up and to take Julia away, and he gives Kirsty the puzzle box for her to watch over until another person seeks it out.
Mm-hmm.
I like that ending much better than the weird bat thing that flies away.
Yeah, I could see that. I like it better too. I mean, I don't not like the one in the film. I think it's cool. However, I like the end of the novella better.
Yeah,
I like the introduction to the Engineer, because
Mhm.
again, it seems the novella, there's a lot more about the Order of the Gash and this kind of hierarchy and the agencies of the damned. And there's little bits of that in the film, but not enough to really even whet your appetite.
Now, so, you know, interesting thing about the novella that, you know, I don't know if a lot of, you know, the casual readers know. This wasn't released as a standalone thing originally. You know, it was originally released as as in that short story form in an anthology book by a number of different authors. Was called Night Visions 3. What I found to be a kind of fun little fact here is that those Night Vision books, they were all the editor on them was George R.R. Martin.
Really?
Who is most famous for writing the Game of Thrones series.
Wow, that's interesting. I wonder what that, if you could track that down, what that goes for. Probably quite a bit.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think this was one of the ones that it got a very, very limited, if any, hardcover edition. But I know that there are paperbacks that are floating around out there. Because I mean, it came out in 1986. And I think those paperbacks are going for, you know, depending on the condition, you know, a couple $100, you know, at least for what's considered to be the quote, you know, first appearance of Pinhead, which,
yeah,
you know, in the book never called Pinhead. And in matter of fact, in the book too, Pinhead was originally a female Cenobite.
Really? I didn't remember that.
The character of Pinhead is very much described as having very female features, very feminine.
It's interesting, the alterations, the evolution that Barker himself, you know, I feel like it would be easy if he hadn't directed that or wrote that, which then it wouldn't exist. But I'm just saying, in other cases, you know, people would malign what, you know, oh, it's so different or whatever. But I mean, these are changes the actual original author made as he brought it into film. Now, some of them may have been, I mean, I think he pretty much had his way with that movie. I don't think there was a studio that really made him do anything other than what he wanted to do. I think that changed as it went on. I mean, obviously, you know, he's disavowed and only recently come back around, you know, now luckily, like it's away from Dimension. And you know, like you just brought up too, Barker has revisited it where I think 2010 or 9 maybe, that Scarlet Gospels came out. So that was the most recent thing he wrote that featured Pinhead. And then there's that novella which you just got, I read last year, but I need to reread, the Toll, which Barker basically, I guess, handpicked the author. I can't remember the author's name. We'll deal with that on a future episode, though. Definitely.
Yeah, gave him some notes and kind of said go to town, and that kind of bridges the gap between Hellbound Heart and the Scarlet Gospels.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny. A couple months ago, I found this old issue of this magazine from 1986, The Horror Show.
Okay.
And it's an adventure in terror. And I don't know anything about this magazine. It's kind of along the lines of A Cemetery Dance. And in it, there is an article, an interview with Clive Barker, and it's right before he blew up. So imagine reading an interview with him where he's basically been a playwright and doing theater. And then now, like, this is his first collection of short stories. The Books of Blood has come out, and it's getting a little bit of traction. And so it's a really interesting interview to see this, like, time capsule of before he was Clive fucking Barker,
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty interesting. So yeah, dude, Hellbound Heart, it's really easy. It's always in print. It's short. It's very accessible. And I would just say anybody that likes Hellraiser that hasn't read it should definitely read it. I feel like there's enough of the DNA that is, cross-pollinated into the movie. And even though I like I said, I prefer the movie, and that relationship with Kirsty and Rory to me is a huge sticking point. I still really, the novella is great. And like you said, there are elements of it that are really, specifically great to the novella that didn't translate.
And beyond that too, just for simply reading it in Clive Barker in his prose. Exactly. I really enjoy his writing style.
Yeah,
the way that he writes. Especially his older stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Books of Blood and
Damnation
so
Game.
Cabal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Cabal is part of the Books of Blood.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right. It is. That wasn't the one I was thinking of, actually, but Cabal is great.
Weave World.
Weave World, that was it. A lot of those that were like released later as standalone, like Cabal, which became, in another movie he directed, he adapted Nightbreed. But a lot of those started out Books of Blood, and then they got so much traction they were released as their own standalone book. But yeah, a lot of the stuff, a lot of his most signature iconic stories were contained in the Books of Blood originally. So, which is, that's like his opening salvo into the literary world. And it's still, you still feel the effect of it today. And I think that's super cool. And yeah, his prose is fantastic. I love he's one of my favorite writers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in a future episode, I think I will, because I am right in the middle of rereading the Books of Blood. After finishing Hellbound Heart, it really inspired me just to go back and kind of reread a bit. So, I am right in the middle of reading The Midnight Meat Train.
Oh, it's a great story. I just reread that last year. That's funny.
So it would be fun for us to talk a little bit, doing this similar kind of thing, comparing that to the 2008 film that they made,
which is surprisingly good. Except for the CG blood takes you out of it a little bit, but other than that, I was really surprised, because the story is very concise, and to make it a movie, it's got to become something else. You have to expand on it, and they did a really good job with it. I was really shocked.
Yeah. So the 2008 film, of course, was starring Vinnie Jones, which Vinnie Jones, he has a soft spot in my heart.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's kind of fresh off the heels of the first Hangover film, Bradley Cooper.
No, I think it's before. He was not a name. When I watched that, when it came out on video, I remember renting it from a Hollywood Video up the street when there were still Hollywood Videos, and he was not a name. I think maybe, what's the football movie he did with Jennifer Lawrence and De Niro? That one might have either just come out or was right around the corner, but I don't think the Hangovers were out yet. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was right before that. Okay. That's when he blew up.
Yeah. Well, I know he was in Wedding Crashers around that same time. But yeah, I mean the film, yeah. So it also has Leslie Bibb in it. Brooke Shields is in it as well.
I didn't
And
remember that. Wow.
and and this guy, another soft spot for my heart, Ted Raimi.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, was in the film.
I love those stories that involve like abandoned subway stations and you know, like the forgotten places that are in the modern world and of the modern world, but not trafficked by the modern world. I love that. And that is one of the best. And you know, it's funny, I read that first Books of Blood in high school, and so I reread it last year, and I think I did the same trajectory, because I think I reread Hellbound Heart and then was like, fuck it, I'm, you know, my appetite is wet for Barker, so I went into Books of Blood. But having not read it since high school, it was very cool to revisit it, and the stuff that's really stayed with me. And like I know they've tried, like I always loved the story Dread. I can't remember if that's in that first Books of Blood or if it's in one of the subsequent ones.
Second,
okay.
2.
And I know they made a movie about that, and I'm so afraid to watch it because I don't think it could translate.
No, Carl Urban.
Is it good? Oh, really?
No, I'm just he did a Judge Dredd movie that was called Dredd.
Oh, I'm so okay. Yeah, and I love that movie. Yeah. But
no, it was Jackson Rathbone who was in the film. And yeah, not really, you know, I don't really know who Jackson Rathbone is
I don't either. It's cool.
Oh, God. He's in a funk band called 100 Monkeys. I don't really, that's all right. Okay. Well, enough about that.
All right. So you want to wrap it? Have you spoke your piece?
I believe I have on this episode of A Most Horrible Library. Well, until the next time, again, I am your host, Chris Saunders.
And I am your other host, Shawn Charles Baker, and we'll see you on the scary side of the street.
Ooh. that was my my Thurman impression.